At 67, I learned to fake unconsciousness just to hear my own son whisper in my ear, "Take your last breath." Mom. The soft click of the oxygen tube disconnecting was louder than thunder because it tore apart the illusion of the perfect family I'd nurtured for 4 decades. Before I called the police, I called my lawyer. Before I hit the emergency button, I turned on the camera. What followed wasn't just about survival, it was about reclaiming the power to decide my own fate. My name is Margaret O'Rourke Maggie, to those who've known me longer than a business lunch, and I built High Plains Prefab from a single warehouse in Fort Collins to a company worth $2.6 million. Not bad for an Irish widow who started with nothing but stubbornness and a dead husband's life insurance policy. But lying here in St. Avalon Medical Center with pneumonia eating through my lungs, I discovered that my greatest creation wasn't the company. It was the illusion that my son Dylan loved me for more than my bank account. The pneumonia hit fast. One day I was reviewing contracts at my oak desk. The next, I was gasping like a landed fish in the emergency room. The doctors, Dr. Aisha Moreno, a no-nonsense pulmonologist, with hands that moved like she was conducting surgery, even when just checking vitals explained that at my age. Severe pneumonia meant continuous oxygen support. Non-negotiable, she said, adjusting the nasal cannula that had become my lifeline. Dylan arrived within hours, Sienna trailing behind him like an expensive shadow in her designer heels that clicked against the hospital linoleum. My son had my late husband Patrick's jawline, but none of his integrity. At 42, Dylan still dressed like he was heading to a tech startup pitch meeting, crisp shirts. No tie. That carefully maintained stubble that suggested casual success he'd never actually earned. "Mom, thank God," he said, gripping my hand with both of his. The pressure was wrong too firm, like he was checking if I was still solid enough to sign documents. We were so worried. Sienna hovered near the foot of the bed, her phone clutched like a talisman. She'd never liked me much, probably because I'd never pretended to like her. The feeling had calcified into mutual tolerance over their 15-year marriage. But here in this sterile room with its green jello cups and beeping monitors, even that veneer cracked. "The company," Dylan said on day 2, not bothering with pleasantries. "We need to discuss transition planning. Mum, just in case." I watched him through half-lidded eyes, the oxygen making my thoughts swim slightly. "I'm not dying. Dylan." "Of course not," he rushed to say, but his gaze had already shifted to calculating. "But High Plains Prefab needs leadership continuity. The contracts, the accounts, someone needs the passwords." The passwords. Not, "How are you feeling?" or "What can I bring you from home?" The passwords. "Everything's with Harold Pike," I managed, referring to my lawyer. "He has instructions." Dylan's jaw tightened Patrick's jaw. "Wasted on him." "Mum, that's not practical. What if something happens suddenly? What if—" "The passwords," Sienna interrupted, her voice sharp as her heels. "Dylan needs full access to ensure business continuity. It's basic succession planning." I studied them both through the fog of medication and exhaustion. Sienna had moved closer, her phone now recording she thought she was subtle, angling it from her hip. But I'd spent 40 years reading body language across negotiation tables. "The estate documents," Dylan pressed. "The 2021 will, is that still current and the safe at the house?" "Mum, we should know the combination." Each question landed like a small stone thrown at glass, individually harmless, collectively creating a web of cracks. The 2021 will left everything to both my children equally. Claire, my daughter in Seattle, had never asked about it. Claire, who called every evening just to hear my voice, who sent funny videos of her architectural projects, who hadn't once mentioned money since I'd been admitted. 2.6 million, Sienna said quietly, like she was tasting the number. That's the current valuation, right, for High Plains. The monitor beside me registered a spike in my heart rate. Nurse Tessa Brooks, a competent black woman who moved through her rounds with military precision, glanced in, caught my eye, then looked at my visitors with professional disapproval. "Mrs. O'Rourke needs rest," she announced. "Visiting hours end at 8. After they left, I lay in the gathering darkness, listening to the oxygen hiss through the tubes. The sound should have been comforting literal life support, but all I could hear were Dylan's questions, urgent as hammer blows, the passwords, the will, the safe, 2.6 million. Outside my window, Denver's lights sparkled like scattered coins. I'd built my company one prefab house at a time, one contract at a time, one 16-hour day at a time while raising 2 children alone after Patrick's heart gave out at 51. Dylan had been 17 then, angry and lost. I'd thought giving him time, giving him money, giving him chance after chance would heal that anger. But lying there with tubes in my nose and monitors tracking every heartbeat, I finally understood some anger doesn't want to be healed. It wants to be paid. The digital clock on the wall glowed 3:20 when I heard the door whisper open. Hospital doors don't creak. They're engineered for silence, but after 5 nights here, I knew every sound. The soft pneumatic hiss, the rubber seal breaking, the particular way the air pressure changed. I kept my breathing steady, deep and laboured as it had been since the pneumonia took hold, and let my eyelids remain still. Dylan's cologne reached me first, that expensive Tom Ford he couldn't afford, but bought anyway. His footsteps were careful, avoiding the squeaky spot near the visitor's chair I'd identified on day 3. Through my barely cracked eyelids, I watched him check the hallway, then ease the door closed. He moved to the oxygen regulator on the wall, his hands surprisingly steady. I'd seen those hands shake when he'd asked me for another loan 6 months ago, but now they moved with purpose. He studied the connections, traced the tubing from the wall to my nose, then followed the safety monitors attached to my finger. "Mom," he whispered. Testing. I gave him nothing, just the ragged breathing of a sick old woman deep in medicated sleep. He moved closer, and I could smell the whiskey under the cologne. Dutch courage, Patrick would have called it. His hand went to the oxygen tube where it connected to the main line. Such a small thing, really. A piece of clear plastic no thicker than a pencil, carrying the blend of gases that kept my damaged lungs functioning. The connection came apart with the softest click. "This is your last breath." "Mum," he whispered, leaning close enough that I could feel his words on my cheek. "I'm sorry, but $210,000 in private debt doesn't leave many options. Sienna found a buyer already, 2.6 million cash for the company. Clean sale, no questions. Everything handled through inheritance. We just need you to stop fighting so hard." My chest began to tighten, not from panic, but from the sudden absence of supplemental oxygen. The monitors hadn't alarmed yet. Dylan had been clever about that. Probably researched it online. There's a delay between disconnection and when the oxygen saturation drops enough to trigger alerts. maybe 90 seconds, maybe 2 minutes. The 2021 will is still valid, he continued, mistaking my stillness for unconsciousness. Checked with that paralegal cousin of Sienna's. Without a newer will, standard inheritance laws apply. Quick probate, especially with your medical condition documented. We can have everything transferred within 6 weeks. My lungs began to burn. Not dramatically, pneumonia had already been doing that, but with a new urgency. The human body knows when it's suffocating, even when the mind tries to override it. I counted seconds in my head, watching Dylan's face through the blur of my lashes. He was crying. My son was standing there, watching me struggle for breath, and crying. But his hand didn't move to reconnect the tube. The lender said they'd break my legs, he whispered. Not a bank. Mum. Private money. The kind that doesn't send letters or follow regulations. 20% monthly interest. It was supposed to be a sure thing, a quick flip on some property in Aurora, but the market tanked, and the door opened with that same pneumatic hiss. Tessa Brooks stood in the doorway, her white scrubs almost glowing in the hallway light behind her. Her eyes took in everything in an instant. Dylan's position, the disconnected tube, my chest rising and falling in increasing distress. Step away from the patient, she said, her voice carrying the kind of authority that comes from 20 years of handling crises. Now! Dylan jerked back, his hands flying up like he'd been burned. She was having trouble. I was trying to. I know exactly what you were trying. Tessa moved past him with swift efficiency, reconnecting the oxygen line with practiced ease. The relief was immediate. Cool air flowing back into my starved lungs. She checked my vitals, adjusted the flow rate, then turned to Dylan with eyes that could have frozen hell. I'm documenting this incident, she said, pulling out her tablet. 3:27 a.m. Found visitor Dylan O'Rourke interfering with patient's oxygen supply. Patient in visible respiratory distress. Oxygen line disconnected at main junction. You can't. That's not. I want to speak to your supervisor. He'll be here at 7. Tessa's fingers flew across the tablet screen. Until then, you're banned from this room. Security will escort you out. After Dylan left, escorted by Damon Kincaid, the night security chief, who looked like he'd played linebacker in another life, Tessa bent close to check my oxygen saturation. I let my eyes flutter open. Mrs. O'Rourke, she said quietly. Do you need me to call anyone? I gripped her hand with more strength than either of us expected. My lawyer, I whispered, my throat raw. Harold Pike. His number's in my phone. Tell him it's exactly what we discussed, and tell him to come now. She squeezed my hand back. A professional who'd seen enough to know when not to ask questions. I'll call him right now. And Mrs. O'Rourke, I'll be right outside your door for the rest of my shift. As she made the call, I stared at the ceiling tiles and thought about Dylan's tears, about the way desperation could make a son into something unrecognizable, about how $2.6 million had become worth more than his mother's last breath. Harold would be here within the hour, and when he arrived, we were going to war. Harold Pike arrived at 4:45 a.m. wearing borrowed scrubs and a medical resident's coat that Tessa had procured from somewhere. At 71. Harold looked more like a tired intern than Colorado's sharpest estate attorney, but his eyes were alert as a hawk's when he slipped into my room. Maggie, he said, pulling the visitor's chair close to my bed. Tell me everything. I did. Every word Dylan had said, every detail about the private debt, the planned sale of my company. Harold took notes on a legal pad, his Mont Blanc pen scratching steadily. When I finished, he set down the pen and looked at me with the expression that had terrified opposing counsel for 40 years. "We're going to bury him legally," he said simply. "But first, we protect you and your assets. Can you sign documents?" "Yes." He produced a leather portfolio from his briefcase. New will. Drafted it in the car. Dylan receives nothing explicitly disinherited with a token $1 to prevent contestation. Claire gets everything: the company, the accounts, the house in Fort Collins. There's also a provision that invalidates any documents you may have signed under duress or incapacity from today backward 6 months. My hand shook slightly as I signed, but my signature was firm enough. Harold notarized it himself. He'd maintained his notary credentials for exactly these situations. Next, he continued, producing another document. A sworn affidavit describing tonight's events. Tessa Brooks has agreed to provide a supporting statement. This goes to the district attorney's office at 9 a. I signed that too. "Now," Harold said, his voice dropping lower. "We need to talk about evidence. Damon Kincaid is willing to help. Off the record. Hospital security cameras caught Dylan entering, but not what happened in the room. We need more." "What are you suggesting? Let him try again. But this time, we're ready." I stared at Harold. "You want to use me as bait. I want to give him enough rope to hang himself legally. Damon can install 2 small cameras, completely legal, in a private room with patient consent. We add a silent alarm connected directly to security. You won't be in danger for more than seconds. And Claire. We call her now. Get her on a flight from Seattle today. She needs to know what's happening, and we need her here to take immediate control of the company if necessary." The call to Claire was harder than signing papers. It was 6 a. in Seattle, and she answered on the second ring, already worried. "Mom, is everything okay?" "Claire, honey, I need you to listen carefully and not interrupt until I'm done." I told her everything. The silence on her end stretched so long I thought we'd been disconnected. "I'm going to kill him," she finally said, her voice deadly calm. "No. You're going to get on the next flight to Denver. Harold will meet you at the airport. We're handling this legally." "Mum, he tried to murder you. For money." "I know. Baby, I know." While Claire booked her flight, Harold made calls to his contacts. By 7 a. we had a plan in motion. Marla Jensen Patrick's old business partner, who still had a key to my house, would retrieve documents from my home office. Damon had already installed the cameras during the shift change, tiny things that looked like part of the medical equipment. The silent alarm button was taped to my bed rail, within easy reach. Dr. Moreno arrived for morning rounds at 7:30, and Harold briefed her privately in the hallway. When she examined me, her face was professionally neutral, but her hands were gentler than usual. "We're going to adjust your medication," she said loudly enough for anyone passing to hear. "You may feel more tired than usual. Don't fight it. Rest is crucial for your recovery." The performance had begun. Marla called Harold at 9:15. Her voice, on speaker, was tight with anger. "Harold, you need to see what I found. Loan documents with Maggie's signature that she couldn't have signed. She was in surgery that day. I remember because I drove her. Equipment purchase orders for machinery the company never received. Transfer authorizations moving funds to accounts Maggie doesn't own. How much? Over 400,000 in falsified documents, all dated within the last 18 months. Harold's expression darkened. Scan everything. Email copies to my secure server. Then bring the originals here. We'll need them authenticated. By noon, the trap was set. Claire was in the air. The cameras were recording. The documents were secured. Hospital administration had quietly updated their records, restricting Dylan's access to my medical information under HIPAA privacy rules. Security had his photo at every entrance with instructions to log any attempt to enter. He'll come back tonight, I told Harold. He has to. He knows Tessa documented the first attempt. He's desperate enough to think he can fix this with another try, make it look natural. Harold squeezed my hand. We'll be ready. Damon will be in the next room with security. The moment he touches that oxygen line, we'll have him. And then we file charges for attempted murder, fraud, forgery, and interference with a medical device. With the evidence we're gathering, he'll be looking at 15 to 20 years minimum. I closed my eyes, feeling every one of my 67 years. I keep thinking about when he was little. He used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. That boy is gone. Maggie. The man who tried to suffocate you for money is someone else. Outside my window, Denver stretched under the November sky, indifferent to the small betrayal playing out in room 314. But I wasn't indifferent. I was ready. Dylan arrived at 2:15 p. During regular visiting hours, carrying a bouquet of yellow roses, my favorite from when he was young enough to remember such things. His face was haggard, sleepless, but he'd managed to shave and change into a fresh polo shirt, the perfect picture of a concerned son. "Mom," he said softly, approaching the bed with careful steps. "I'm so sorry about last night. I was checking your oxygen because you seemed to be struggling, and that nurse completely misunderstood. I let my eyes flutter, playing the part of a heavily medicated patient. Dr. Moreno had indeed adjusted my medications, but only slightly enough to make my responses slower, but not enough to truly impair me. The cameras were recording every word, every gesture. Dylan," I mumbled, letting my voice slur slightly. "So tired?" He pulled the chair close, his hand finding mine. "I know. Mom, just rest. I'll stay here with you." For an hour, he played the devoted son. He adjusted my blankets, offered me ice chips, even read from a magazine about prefab housing innovations. Anyone watching would have seen a touching bedside vigil. But I felt the way his eyes kept returning to the oxygen regulator, the way his fingers drummed against his thigh, a nervous tell he'd had since childhood. At 3:30, he stood and walked to the window, checking the hallway through the door's small window. Shift change. He'd done his homework. "You know, Mum," he said, returning to my bedside. "Sienna and I have been talking about the future, about making sure your company continues your legacy. We found a buyer who really respects what you've built. They'd keep the High Plains prefab name. Honor your vision." His hand moved to the oxygen tube, fingers tracing its path like he was merely fidgeting. 2.6 million is actually below market value. We could probably get 3 million if we waited, but with your condition, timing matters. I kept my breathing steady, though my hand was inches from the silent alarm. "The private lender I mentioned," he continued, his voice dropping to barely a whisper. "They're not patient people. They already sent someone to the house. Sienna's scared. Claire doesn't understand because she's never made mistakes like mine, never been desperate. His fingers found the connection point again, but this time he was smarter. He pulled out his phone first, setting it to play a meditation app white noise that would mask small sounds. Then he reached for the monitor's settings, scrolling through options with practiced ease. Learned some things online, he murmured. Amazing what medical forums teach you, like how to adjust alarm parameters, delay the response time from 30 seconds to 3 minutes, just enough time for oxygen deprivation to cause complications. The monitor's soft beeping changed pitch slightly as he modified the settings. My finger found the alarm button, but I waited. Harold had said to let him incriminate himself fully. Dylan disconnected the oxygen line with that same soft click. This time, no interruptions. 3 minutes? Mom. Peaceful. You just drift off, and everything gets resolved. The debt goes away. Sienna and I get a fresh start. Claire gets her share. Everyone wins. My chest began to tighten immediately. This time, knowing it was coming didn't make it easier. The human body's panic response to suffocation is primal, immediate. But I held still, counting seconds. I checked the will, Dylan continued, watching my chest rise and fall with increasing effort. The 2021 version is filed with the county, 50-50 split between Claire and me, 1.3 million each, enough to clear my debts and start over. 30 seconds. My vision began to grey at the edges. You were always tougher on me than Claire, he said, and there was genuine pain in his voice now. Nothing I did was ever good enough, not like Dad would have understood. He knew what it was like to fail. 60 seconds. My lungs burned like fire. But you just kept building, kept succeeding, kept making me feel like nothing I touched would ever match up. Do you know what it's like being Margaret O'Rourke's disappointment of a son? 90 seconds. The grey was spreading, darkening. I hit the alarm. The door burst open so fast, Dylan didn't even have time to step back. Damon Kincaid filled the doorframe, followed by 2 more security officers and Tessa Brooks. Behind them, I glimpsed Harold Pike and a woman in a Denver police uniform. "Don't move," Damon commanded, his hand on Dylan's shoulder before my son could even process what was happening. Tessa reconnected my oxygen with swift efficiency, the blessed flow of air making me gasp audibly. She checked the monitor settings, her expression professionally furious. "Alarm parameters altered at 3:38 p.m., she announced to the room. Delay extended from 30 seconds to 3 minutes. Oxygen disconnected for approximately 93 seconds. Harold stepped forward with a tablet, turning it to face Dylan. On the screen, crystal clear, was Dylan's face as he'd adjusted the monitor, as he'd disconnected the tube, as he'd confessed to checking the will. Every word about the private debt, the planned sale, the 3 minutes of peaceful death, all recorded in high definition. "Dylan O'Rourke," the police officer said, producing handcuffs. "You're under arrest for attempted murder, assault on a vulnerable adult, and interference with life-saving medical equipment." Dylan's face went white. "Mum," he said, looking at me as I pulled myself up in bed, very much alert. "Mum, you were awake." I met his eyes steadily. "Every second, Dylan, every word." "This was a setup." His voice cracked like it had when he was 13, caught lying about breaking Patrick's fishing rod. "This was evidence," Harold corrected. "Your mother gave you the opportunity to stop. Twice. You chose to continue. As the officer read Dylan his rights, Sienna appeared in the doorway, her face flushed with anger. "What's happening, Dylan?" "They won't let me—" "Mrs. O'Rourke," Harold said smoothly. "You'll want to contact a lawyer. We'll be filing civil suits for fraud, conspiracy, and attempted murder. The falsified documents from High Plains Prefab alone carry a penalty of up to 20 years. The room was suddenly very quiet, except for the steady beep of my monitors and the hiss of oxygen through the tube sounds of life continuing, despite my son's best efforts. "You set him up?" Sienna's voice rose to a shriek that made everyone in the room wince. "You lying, manipulative, Mrs. O'Rourke." Damon Kincaid stepped between her and my bed, his bulk an immovable wall. "You need to leave. Now." "This is entrapment," she spat, her phone already out, recording everything. "My cousin's a paralegal, and this is completely legal." Harold interrupted, his voice carrying the authority of 5 decades in law. "Your husband attempted murder. Twice. We have medical documentation from the first attempt and video evidence of the second. Your paralegal cousin might want to review Colorado Revised Statutes Title 18 regarding attempted first-degree murder." He pulled a folder from his briefcase, spreading documents across my bedside table with theatrical precision. "We also have these fascinating documents from Mrs. O'Rourke's home office. Loan agreements with forged signatures, equipment purchases that never existed, fund transfers to accounts Mrs. O'Rourke never opened." Sienna's face went from red to white as she recognized the papers. "Those are private financial—" "Those are criminal evidence," Harold corrected. "Dated when Mrs. O'Rourke was in surgery, traveling for business, or particularly interesting at her husband's funeral anniversary in Michigan. Rather difficult to sign documents in Colorado while placing flowers on a grave in Detroit." Tessa had been typing steadily on her tablet throughout the confrontation. "Medical report filed. Dr. Moreno has been notified. Hospital administration is implementing immediate access restrictions." The police officer holding Dylan's arm spoke up. "We need to process Mr. O'Rourke at the station." "Mrs. O'Rourke," she said to Sienna. "You can follow us there, but any attempt to interfere will result in additional charges." As they led Dylan out, he turned back to look at me one last time. "Mom, please. The people I owe, they'll kill me." I forced myself to meet his eyes. "Then you should have thought of that before you tried to kill me." After the room emptied, leaving only Harold and Tessa, I found myself shaking, not from fear or oxygen deprivation, but from the sheer weight of what had just happened. My son, the boy I'd carried for 9 months, taught to ride a bike, cheered at Little League games, had stood over me and calculated how long it would take me to suffocate. "Claire landed," Harold said gently, checking his phone. "She'll be here in 40 minutes. The district attorney will want your statement," he continued, shifting back to business. "With the video evidence, the medical documentation, and the financial fraud, we're looking at a strong case. But Maggie, you need to understand Dylan will likely take a plea deal, 15 to 20 years if he's smart. And Sienna, conspiracy charges at minimum. The forensic accountants will trace every forged document, every fraudulent transfer. If she knew about the murder attempts, and her behavior suggests she did, she's looking at comparable time." Tessa adjusted my oxygen flow one more time, her hands infinitely gentle. "Mrs. O'Rourke, your oxygen saturation is still lower than I'd like. You need to rest. Real rest. Not pretending." But rest felt impossible. My mind kept replaying Dylan's words. You were always tougher on me than Claire. Was that true? Had I been so focused on building my company that I'd missed the moment my son stopped seeing me as his mother and started seeing me as an obstacle to $2.6 million? Claire arrived at 4:10 p. Still in the jeans and University of Washington sweatshirt she'd thrown on that morning. She took one look at me and burst into tears. Not delicate tears, but body-shaking sobs that made her whole frame shudder. "Mom," she gasped, falling into the chair beside my bed. Oh God. Mom. I reached for her hand, and she gripped it like a lifeline. "I'm okay, baby. I'm okay. He tried to kill you. Dylan tried to actually kill you. For money." Harold gave us a moment before speaking. "Claire, I need to walk you through some documents. Your mother has made you sole beneficiary of her estate and given you immediate power of attorney for High Plains Prefab. There are decisions that need to be made." Claire straightened, wiping her face with her sleeve. At 39, my daughter had her father's steady nature and my business sense, a combination that had made her successful in Seattle's competitive architectural scene. What kind of decisions? First, the company. Several contracts need signatures this week. Second, your mother's house. We need to secure it. Change locks. Install security systems. Third, the criminal case. You'll need to be prepared for media attention once this goes public. Media. I hadn't thought that far ahead. Harold's expression was grim. Prominent business owner. Attempted murder by her son. Millions at stake. The press will be all over this. We need to control the narrative. Claire squeezed my hand. We'll handle it. Mom. All of it. You just focus on getting better. As the afternoon wore on, Harold and Claire worked through paperwork while I dozed fitfully. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt that oxygen tube disconnecting. Heard Dylan's voice. "This is your last breath, Mom." By 6 p.m. The new locks were being installed at my house. By 7, Claire had spoken with High Plains Prefab's senior managers, ensuring business continuity. By 8, Harold had filed formal complaints with the police for the financial fraud, adding years to Dylan's potential sentence. "There's one more thing," Harold said as visiting hours wound down. "The private lenders Dylan mentioned, they're real. We've had inquiries at the office. They're looking for their money." "How much does he really owe?" Claire asked. "With interest. Close to $300,000 now. They won't care that he's in jail." I closed my eyes, feeling every one of my 67 years. That's not our problem anymore. But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't that simple. Nothing about this would be simple. My son had tried to murder me. My daughter-in-law was complicit, and my family was destroyed. All for money that Dylan would never see. The oxygen hissed steadily through my tubes, each breath a reminder that I was alive despite my son's best efforts. Alive and ready to fight. The next morning brought a parade of officials to my hospital room. The district attorney himself, a sharp-eyed man named Robert Castellanos, reviewed the evidence with the kind of satisfaction prosecutors get when a case presents itself wrapped in a bow. "Mrs. O'Rourke, with your permission, we're adding charges," he said, scrolling through his tablet. "The financial fraud alone spans 18 months. We're looking at 43 counts of forgery, 16 counts of wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit murder in the first degree." "First degree?" Claire asked from her spot beside my bed. She hadn't left since yesterday. "Premeditation," Castellanos explained. "The online research about oxygen monitors, The timing with shift changes. The prepared story about the property sale, this wasn't a crime of passion. This was planned. Harold presented our own stack of evidence. We've also discovered that Dylan and Sienna approached 3 different buyers for High Plains prefab over the last 2 months. They were negotiating a sale before Mrs. O'Rourke even became ill. My chest tightened, not from lack of oxygen this time, but from the realization of how long my son had been planning my death. The pneumonia must have seemed like a gift to him, an opportunity to accelerate his timeline. We're freezing all their assets, Castellanos continued. Bank accounts, investment portfolios, property. The forensic accountants need to trace every fraudulent transaction. What about High Plains prefab? I asked. Protected, Harold assured me. I've filed emergency injunctions. No one can touch the company without Claire's authorization as the designated power of attorney. We've also notified your banks they're reviewing every transaction from the last 2 years, comparing signatures against authenticated samples. Dr. Moreno arrived for rounds, checking my vitals with her usual efficiency. Your oxygen saturation is improving, but you're staying at least another week. The stress of recent events hasn't helped your recovery. After she left, Castellanos stood to go. Mrs. O'Rourke, we'll need you to testify when this goes to trial. Are you prepared for that? I thought of Dylan as a boy, bringing me dandelions he'd picked from the yard, so proud of his flowers for Mommy. Then I thought of him calculating how long it would take me to suffocate. I'm prepared. The media found the story by noon. Harold had tried to control the narrative, but someone at the courthouse leaked the arrest records. Millionaire businesswoman's son, charged with attempted murder, ran across the Denver Post's website. By 3 p.m., news vans were circling the hospital like vultures. Don't talk to anyone, Harold warned. Not even no comment. Silence is better than sound bites they can twist. Claire handled the business calls that flooded in, clients worried about their contracts, employees fearful for their jobs, suppliers wondering about payment schedules. She was magnificent, steady, and clear. High Plains prefab remains fully operational. All contracts will be honored. It's business as usual. But it wasn't business as usual. Not when my own son had tried to murder me for money. At 4 p.m., Tessa brought unexpected news. There's a woman here to see you. Says she's Marla Jensen. Marla entered carrying a banker's box, her weathered face grim. She'd been Patrick's partner in his first construction venture, and she'd remained a family friend even after the business dissolved. Maggie, I found more, she said without preamble. Hidden in that old filing cabinet in your garage. She pulled out a folder. Dylan's been at this longer than we thought. The documents were damning. Fake invoices going back 3 years. A second mortgage application on my house that had been mysteriously withdrawn, probably when Dylan realized he couldn't forge the notarization. Even an attempt to sell my late husband's classic Mustang, still under restoration in my garage, with ownership documents that claimed Dylan as the inheritor. Patrick left that car to you specifically, Marla said, her voice tight with anger. Dylan knows that. He was there when the will was read. Claire examined each document, her architect's eye for detail, catching discrepancies I might have missed. Mum, some of these signatures aren't just forged, they're traced. Look, you can see the hesitation marks where he went over the letters multiple times. Harold immediately called Castellanos. We need to amend the charges again. This goes back 3 years minimum. As they discussed legal strategies, I found myself thinking about Sienna. She'd been so quick to defend Dylan, so prepared with arguments about entrapment and legal technicalities. How long had she known? How long had she been helping him plan Mrs. O'Rourke? Damon Kincaid appeared in the doorway. Sorry to interrupt, but we've had an incident. Someone tried to access your room about an hour ago using fake credentials. Security detained them, turned out to be a private investigator hired by Sienna O'Rourke. What did he want? Harold demanded. According to his story, she wanted photos of Mrs. O'Rourke's condition for insurance purposes. But he was also asking staff about visiting hours, security procedures, shift changes. The implication hung in the air. Even with Dylan in jail, Sienna was still scheming. We need a restraining order, Harold said immediately. Today. Claire's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, and her face darkened. Sienna's posting on Facebook. She's claiming you manipulated Dylan, that you've always favoured me, that this is all a setup to cut him out of his rightful inheritance. Let her, I said, surprising everyone. Let her show the world exactly who she is. Every post is evidence of her state of mind, her involvement. Harold smiled the sharp expression that had terrified opposing counsel for decades. You're right. Give her enough rope. She'll hang herself with it. I finished. That evening, as Claire and Harold prepared to leave for a strategy meeting with the district attorney, I asked for a moment alone. The room felt too quiet without the constant stream of officials and evidence and legal discussion. Just me, the monitors, and the steady hiss of oxygen. I picked up my phone and scrolled to Dylan's contact. His photo still smiled back at me, taken at last year's Christmas dinner, when he'd seemed genuinely happy. Before the debts, apparently, before the planning. My finger hovered over the delete button, but I couldn't do it. Not yet. Maybe not ever. He was still my son, even if he'd tried to end my life for money. That was my burden to carry, loving someone who'd tried to kill me. The oxygen flowed steadily through my tubes, each breath a small victory. Tomorrow would bring more lawyers, more evidence, more horrible discoveries about how long Dylan had been planning my death. But tonight, I simply breathed and tried not to think about the son I'd lost long before he ever disconnected that tube. The meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. at Harold's law firm, a gleaming tower in downtown Denver. I'd been released from the hospital 3 days earlier, still weak but determined to see this through. Claire pushed my wheelchair through the marble lobby while Harold briefed us one final time. They think this is a settlement negotiation, he said as the elevator rose. Dylan's lawyer reached out yesterday, talking about family resolution and avoiding trial publicity. They have no idea what we've prepared. The conference room was all glass and dark wood, designed to intimidate. Dylan sat at the far end of the table in an ill-fitting suit, probably borrowed, since his assets were frozen. Sienna was beside him, her designer outfit replaced by something off the rack. Their lawyer, a nervous-looking man named Carl Brennan, shuffled papers between them. Mrs. O'Rourke, Brennan began. We're here to discuss a possible resolution that keeps this family matter private. This is an attempted murder case. Harold interrupted. Not a family dispute. My client maintains his innocence, and your client is on video disconnecting his mother's oxygen while she suffocated. Harold opened his laptop, the screen facing them. Would you like to review the footage? Dylan's face went pale, But Sienna leaned forward aggressively. This is entrapment. You set him up. Any jury will see premeditation, Castellanos said, entering the room with two assistant prosecutors. I hadn't known he was coming, but Harold didn't look surprised. Mr. O'Rourke, we're not here to negotiate your guilt. That's established. We're here because your mother insisted on giving you one opportunity to minimize the damage. Harold pulled out a document. This is a confession agreement. You sign this, admitting to attempted murder and fraud, and we recommend 25 years instead of life. You don't sign. We go to trial with 47 separate charges and seek maximum penalties. 25 years. Dylan's voice cracked. Mum, please. There's more. Harold continued. This agreement includes full restitution for the fraudulent transactions, approximately $430,000, and a complete waiver of any inheritance claims, future or retroactive. Sienna stood up so fast her chair tipped. This is insane. You can't... Mrs. O'Rourke. Castellanos addressed her directly. You should be grateful you're not under arrest. Yet. We have evidence of your involvement in the financial fraud, including emails you sent to potential buyers of High Plains prefab while Mrs. O'Rourke was in the hospital. Harold produced printouts emails from Sienna's account discussing the anticipated timeline for estate transfer and expedited sale opportunities given the seller's health status. The dates were from before Dylan's first attempt on my life. However, Harold said, his voice carrying that dangerous calm that preceded his killing blows in court. We have something special for you. Sienna. He pulled out another folder, this one marked with bank logos. 3 months ago, you opened an account in the Cayman Islands. 2 months ago, you transferred $40,000 from a High Plains prefab vendor payment that was supposedly returned for incorrect routing. 1 month ago, you created a shell company in Delaware named Mountain Vista Holdings, LLC, and listed yourself as sole proprietor. Sienna's face had gone from red to white to grey. Sign the confession, Harold continued, sliding the document toward Dylan. Or we add international fraud and money laundering charges for your wife. Those carry federal penalties. You threatening us? Brennan protested weakly. I'm presenting options. Harold replied. Door 1, Dylan confesses. Takes 25 years. Sienna gets charged only with domestic fraud. Probably serves 5 to 7. Door 2, we go to trial. Present every piece of evidence, including the premeditated murder attempt, the 3-year fraud pattern, and the international money laundering. Dylan gets life. Sienna gets 20 minimum in federal prison. The room was silent, except for the distant hum of downtown traffic 30 floors below. There's a third option, I said, speaking for the first time since entering the room. Everyone turned to look at me. I wheeled myself closer to the table, close enough to see the desperation in Dylan's eyes. You sign the confession. You provide full documentation of every fraudulent transaction, every forged signature, every hidden account. You testify against the private lenders who drove you to this, and you agree to never contact me or Claire again. Mum, I'm not your mother anymore, I said, my voice steady despite the pain of those words. You ended that relationship when you stood over my hospital bed and calculated how long it would take me to die. I pulled out my phone and showed him a photo, the Mustang in my garage. Patrick's pride and joy. Your father left this car to you in his original will, before I changed it. He wanted you to help me finish the restoration. Make it a father-son project even after he was gone. Dylan's eyes filled with tears. I was going to surprise you with it for your 45th birthday. I continued. Had already started ordering parts. But now it's being sold. The proceeds will go to the American Lung Association. Seemed fitting. Considering. Please, Dylan whispered. The people I owe, they'll come after me in prison. Then you should have thought of that before borrowing from them, before trying to kill me, before choosing money over your mother's life. Brennan whispered urgently to Dylan, gesturing at the papers. After a long moment, Dylan picked up Harold's Mont Blanc pen. Of course, Harold made him use that particular pen and began signing. Each signature was another nail in his own coffin, legally speaking. Initial here, Harold instructed, pointing to various pages. And here. This acknowledges the video evidence. This waives appeal rights for the confession. This confirms the fraud amounts. When Dylan reached the final page, his hand hesitated over the line that read, I acknowledge attempting to cause the death of Margaret O'Rourke for financial gain. Sign it, Sienna hissed. Just sign it. He did. The moment the pen lifted, Castellanos nodded to someone outside. 2 federal marshals entered, not local police, but federal officers. Sienna O'Rourke, one announced. You're under arrest for wire fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit murder. What no Dylan signed the confession. We had a deal. You had nothing, Castellanos said. The federal charges were filed this morning. The confession just determines whether we add international banking violations. As they led both Dylan and Sienna out in handcuffs, my son turned back one last time. I'm sorry, he said. No, I replied. You're only sorry you got caught. The federal marshal's footsteps echoed down the hallway as they led Dylan and Sienna away. The conference room fell silent. That particular kind of quiet that follows an execution. Because that's what this was, the execution of my role as Dylan's mother. The death of any illusion that my family could be salvaged. Claire wheeled me to the window while Harold and Castellanos discussed final procedures. 30 floors below, Denver sprawled under the December morning, indifferent to the small tragedy that had just played out. I could see the federal courthouse from here, where Dylan would be processed, photographed, and assigned a number that would define him for the next 25 years. The assets will be unfrozen within 48 hours, Harold was saying. High Plains prefab is fully protected. The fraudulent transactions will be reversed through civil recovery proceedings. What about the private lenders? Claire asked. That's Dylan's problem now. Castellanos replied. Though they'll have a hard time collecting from someone in federal prison. I thought about those lenders, the kind who break legs over unpaid debts. Dylan had chosen them over legitimate banks, chosen quick money with brutal consequences over asking his mother for help. Pride or desperation, I'd never know. There's one more thing, Harold said, pulling out a small device, a digital recorder. Hospital security made a copy of the surveillance footage. This is yours, Maggie. The only copy outside of evidence custody. I held the device, surprisingly heavy for something so small. It contained the moment my son chose money over my life, captured in high definition. Why would I want this? Because someday you might doubt yourself. Wonder if you did the right thing? This is your reminder that you didn't destroy your son, he destroyed himself. We left the building through a private exit, avoiding the media clustered at the main entrance. Someone had leaked the arrest, and the story was already trending online. Colorado business owner's son arrested in attempted matricide plot. Back at my house, locks changed, security system installed, every trace of Dylan's presence boxed and removed. I stood in my home office looking at the wall of family photos, Dylan's high school graduation, his wedding to Sienna, last Christmas, all of us smiling around the tree I'd decorated myself despite my arthritis. Claire found me there an hour later, still staring at those frozen moments. "You should take them down," she said gently. "Should I?" I touched the photo from Dylan's 10th birthday. He'd been so excited about the bike we'd saved 6 months to afford. Or should I leave them as a reminder? Of what? That people aren't photographs. They change. They choose paths we never imagined for them. Claire pulled me into a careful hug, mindful of my still weak lungs. "He made his choice? Mom? You just refused to be his victim." That evening, Tessa Brooks called to check on me. She'd been doing that daily since my discharge. "Saw the news," she said simply. "You did the right thing." Did I? Sending my own son to prison for 25 years. He tried to suffocate you, twice, while you were helpless in a hospital bed. There's no grey area here, Mrs. O'Rourke. After we hung up, I sat in Patrick's old chair, the one that still smelled faintly of his pipe tobacco even after 15 years. What would he think of all this? Would he understand the choices Dylan made? Or would he be as horrified as I was? My phone buzzed with a message from Marla Jensen. "Proud of you, Maggie." Patrick would be too. Maybe. Or maybe Patrick would have found a way to save Dylan from himself. But Patrick wasn't here, and I'd had to choose between being a victim or being a survivor. The next morning brought lawyers and paperwork civil suits to recover the fraudulent transactions, insurance claims to process, business documents to sign. Claire had taken a leave from her firm in Seattle to help run High Plains Prefab, and she moved through the tasks with the same efficiency I'd once brought to building the company. "The employees want to know if you're coming back," she said over lunch. "Are you asking if I'm dying?" "I'm asking if you're ready." I thought about it. My lungs were healing but still weak. My son was in federal prison. My daughter-in-law was facing her own trial. The business I'd built over 40 years had almost been sold out from under me while I suffocated. "Monday," I said. "I'll go back Monday." Claire smiled her father's smile, warm and genuine. "Good. The place needs you. I can run it. But I can't be you." That afternoon, I stood in front of the security camera in my living room, one of 6 Damon had recommended, and looked directly into its lens. Somewhere, this footage was being recorded, stored, archived. Evidence of my continued survival. "I'm Margaret O'Rourke," I said to the camera. "I'm 67 years old. I built a company worth $2.6 million. My son tried to kill me for it, and I'm still here." The little red recording light blinked back at me, steady as a heartbeat. I thought about the oxygen tube in the hospital, that soft click of disconnection that had started everything. Such a small sound to herald such massive betrayal. But also the sound that had revealed the truth, stripped away the illusions, and ultimately set me free. Dylan would serve his 25 years. Sienna would serve her time for fraud and conspiracy. High Plains Prefab would continue, maybe even grow, under Claire's guidance and my experience. And I would breathe each breath a choice, a victory, a defiance of my son's attempt to steal them from me. The oxygen that had been my vulnerability had become my strength. flowing through healed lungs that had survived both pneumonia and attempted murder. I looked one last time at the family photos on the wall, then began taking them down. Not to throw away, but to store. Someday, maybe, I'd be able to look at them without feeling the ghost of Dylan's hands on my oxygen tube. Someday, the boy in those photos might feel separate from the man in federal prison. But not today. Today, I simply breathed, and that was enough. The camera kept recording, documenting this moment like all the others. Evidence of my survival. Proof that Margaret O'Rourke was still here, still fighting, still refusing to be anyone's last breath. Thank you for listening to my story. I'm curious to know where you're tuning in from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and let me know your thoughts on this story. What would you have done in my situation?